Today, we're diving deep into a pretty intense analysis that claims we're watching a deliberate and very real military buildup happening all around Iran. We're going to break down the supposed signs on the ground, the potential war plans, and the really deep motivations that, according to the source, are pushing the whole region right to the edge.
So let's just start with this quote, because it really sets the stage. The analysis we're exploring kicks off with this line, arguing that this isn't just about politics or strategy anymore. No, the claim is that this whole situation is spinning out of control into something totally unpredictable, something they call madness.
So, to get our heads around this, here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the actual signs of a military buildup. Then, the two possible ways a war could kick off. After that, we'll get into something called the Israeli equation. And finally, we'll look at this idea of a huge, almost apocalyptic showdown.
All right, first up, what can we actually see? The analysis we're digging into points to some very specific movements on the ground, things they say are clear evidence that someone is getting ready for a fight.
And listen, this isn't just about one thing. According to the source, what we're seeing is a coordinated push on multiple fronts. You've got official U.S. military planes and troops moving into position, a big uptick in spy planes flying overhead, and then there's the more covert stuff, like an alleged flow of smuggled weapons into Iran. You put it all together, and it paints a picture of a strategy aimed at stirring up trouble from both the outside and the inside.
Okay, so if these moves are for real, how could a war actually start? Well, the analysis lays out two very different playbooks for how this could all go down.
Which brings us to the million-dollar question, right? What's the end game here? Are we talking about a straightforward military strike, or is there something way more complicated in the works? So here are the two options on the table, and they couldn't be more different. Option one is a massive air campaign, but the analysis says this would be a disaster. It would just trigger a huge counterattack from Iran's powerful missile arsenal, and you wouldn't get a decisive win. So then there's option two, which this source thinks is more likely, a plan to actually engineer a civil war inside Iran. And how would you even do that? Well, the theory goes something like this. Step one, you launch surgical airstrikes to take out security and command centers in the border areas. Step two, in the chaos that follows, you move armed proxy groups in to start fights in the cities. And step three, the ultimate goal. You hope those small fires catch and spread into a full-blown civil war. But, and this is a huge but, the source says there's a critical flaw in this whole plan. It all hinges on one massive assumption, that you can actually break Iran's military and security forces apart. Turn the Revolutionary Guard against the army. The analysis is basically saying, no way. These groups are the foundation of the government. They're not just going to collapse. Okay, so if the military plans are that risky, maybe even doomed to fail, why would anyone push for this conflict? This is where the analysis introduces its main argument. To understand the why, you have to look at what it calls the Israel equation. And here it is. This is probably the boldest claim in the entire piece. The argument is that this isn't really about nuclear programs or terrorism or regional stability. No. It claims this whole push for war is being designed to solve what's being framed as an existential problem for Israel. This quote is used to try and explain the kind of thinking behind such a high-stakes move. It's portrayed as this incredible gamble, one that's only possible if you believe that no matter how risky it gets, your destiny is sort of divinely protected. So here's the strategic problem, as laid out by the source. The argument is that Israel feels stuck in this endless fight with Iranian-backed groups like Hezbollah and Hamas, a fight it can't win for good. So the logic goes, if you can't beat the proxies, you have to go after their source. You have to take out Iran itself. And now we're going to zoom way out, because according to this analysis, what we're seeing isn't just a 21st century political dispute. It's being framed as the latest round in a conflict that is much older and much deeper. The source even has a name for it, a war for the hereafter. The idea here is that this struggle isn't really about physical things like land or oil. It's being cast as an epic, almost religious battle between competing worldviews and powerful beliefs about divine destiny. And this timeline is meant to put that into perspective. The argument is that today's headlines are nothing new. They're just the latest chapter in a story that the source traces all the way back through the centuries, from the Crusades to the colonial period and right up to the 1979 Iranian Revolution, which it calls a civilizational awakening. So in the end, the whole thing is presented as a clash between two totally different mindsets. On one side, you have what's described as a risk-taking, expansionist worldview that's convinced it has a divine mission. And on the other, you have what's called a culture of resistance, a sleeping empire that was reawakened and hardened by the brutal Iran-Iraq War. And this, the source argues, is why other world powers like Russia and China just can't get a handle on it. They operate in a world of logic, of predictable geopolitics. But this conflict, it's argued, isn't playing by those rules. It's running on a completely different operating system, what the source dramatically calls religious madness.
Which brings us to the final conclusion of the analysis, that the entire Western strategy might be based on a fundamental and massive miscalculation. The argument is that the West is looking at Iran through an old lens, totally failing to see what the source calls the unknown factor, the true identity of a civilization that has been reborn through conflict and is, in its view, ready for war.
And that's what we'll leave you with. It's the central, provocative question this entire analysis forces us to ask. Are we just watching a chess game of calculated moves and strategies?